the suspension on the MX-5, and we are removing the OEM stuff now. The Penske's are on the table and being assembled. We already did the right side of the car just so that we could make sure we had everything done correctly for the video and show you guys how to assemble these things the right way. All right, so you guys will need to reuse the OEM top hat in the rear. We're not going to reuse this rubber piece here, but easiest way to get this guy off is going to be just to zap that nut off the top with an impact. Just be aware that there's preload on the spring, obviously. The only other thing you're going to reuse is going to be the factory hardware. You'll actually be adding a spacer in the lower shock mount, and we will get to that a little bit later. But right now, this guy does require a little bit of modification. We have to fit this in the top here, so you guys can see it doesn't exactly fit as it comes. I believe the hole's 7/8 right now. It needs to be 15/16, so it's really close. We're just going to use a sanding bit and kind of work the hole out a little bit to 15/16 until it fits in there nice and snug. You could use a drill. It says to use a high-speed drill bit. Unfortunately, we don't have anything the right size for our drill press, so we're going to do it this way. You guys might have another way of doing it, and that's all good. As long as it fits in there and you can get it torqued down, then good to go. And it looks like we are at 876 and we need to be at 938. So we got a little work to do here. Should be getting pretty close here. We've been kind of, oh, there we go. So just kind of slowly working away at it. It's difficult to make sure that you can get this absolutely perfectly circular, but obviously a drill bit would be a better tool for that. But now I believe in the instructions, now that we have this fitting in there, dropping in there like it should, they want you to go and at a 45-degree angle, kind of angle out the inside edge here. So you just want to be careful not to extend the diameter anymore, but kind of come in at a 45 here and just work the edges on the inside down there. So we're going to do that now. And I believe that that's just so that when this seats through there, so that everything seats in a little bit easier. Kind of a clumsy tool to do this with, really, so it's, you know, probably not the best way of doing that, I'm sure. So hopefully you guys have a better tool for that, but as long as that fits in there and you've got that edge rounded out there, and then obviously you want to deburr everything and you want to make sure that you clean this out really well so that there's no debris left in it before you assemble everything back together. So we're going to go do that now. So when you guys assemble this, you're going to drop this guy down in from the bottom. He'll be sitting like that. You've got two flat shims that are going to go on first, and then we have these cone washers, these Belleville washers here. You're going to put the base of the washer, so the cone base down, so it's going to be like this, kind of like a hill there with the top like that. And then we'll put on the little monoball here, and we'll tighten everything down, and then at the end, obviously, you'd put the nut and stuff on. We'll go ahead and do that. So you kind of just drop it down there, and my hands are small enough I can actually fit my hand in here, so it's not too hard, but Kevin kind of had to do a thing when he did it. It was cool. It was like watching him juggle. All right, so got that guy in there. You're gonna go with the two flat shim spacers first, and then we've got all of our washers. These things again are gonna go with the base facing down like that. And then this guy is gonna go with the grooves toward the top. So we're gonna just thread that guy on there like such. And we're just gonna get this hand tight for now. We'll go ahead and tighten everything down just so you guys know. It doesn't say on here, I believe, but it's 50 foot-pounds is what I'm being told from Mazda that you're supposed to get this torqued down to. We'll do that a little bit later here. We're gonna move on with the rest of the shock assembly, but yeah, there you have it. We're gonna start with this bump stop spacer. It's just gonna fit right up here at the top. And then we'll have this collar next up. Slides down right there. And just so you guys know, we're kind of ballparking the ride height right now based on a car that we saw with these already installed. So we have about 6 threads showing right now, but obviously there's gonna be a lot of adjustment that needs to be done after the fact. So next up is your main spring. Sit right down on that collar there. And then you have this guy, which is gonna hold your helper spring. Helper spring goes on next. And then we've got this little collar here that just helps keep the helper spring in place. And that is gonna sit just inside of the top hat here. I gotta get that guy down. There we go, just like that. So there you guys have it. And as you guys notice, the seals on the shock are to make sure that nobody opens the shocks up and changes anything with the fluid or anything like that, makes any adjustments to them, because these are Spec shocks in a Spec racing series. But yeah, final piece right here is just gonna be this little washer spacer guy that goes at the top here. And then you have your final nut at the top. Tighten that guy down and you're good to go. So moving on to the front shocks here. The top hats we're gonna assemble first. Calls for a little bit of anti-seize to go on this guy here. So you wanna make sure you don't turn it upside down because this bearing is not pressed in, it'll fall out. So we did have a grumpy thread earlier on the top hat side, so hopefully that's cleaned up now and we can get this threaded in. We're gonna wipe up any of the extra anti-seize here, and then next we're gonna take a Sharpie, if I can get this cap off this Sharpie. I'm gonna use 2 hands for that. There we go. And you're just gonna make a mark here on the nut down to top hat there, just like that. And then we're gonna take this adjustable wrench and we're gonna clock this about 5 degrees. It's not a lot, so we're gonna go right there. Tighten this down. We'll call that about 5 degrees there. So once you're done doing that, you're gonna wipe that away. You can use some WD-40 or something, get that off of there. And then we're gonna take a paint pen and we're gonna mark just across the opposite side here, and this will be a permanent mark that's gonna stay. There you go, just like that. And last up are these bolts here for the top hat. So just a little bit of red Loctite on those. We're just gonna thread this guy in here. And the head of the bolt is an M8. So we've got that sitting on standby. We'll go ahead and tighten these down. It doesn't list a torque spec here, so we're just gonna go with tight is tight. Alrighty. And then we have our nuts. You kind of just put those guys on loosely for now so that you don't lose them. So just like the rear, you're gonna start with your bump stop spacer at the top there. We're gonna go with the collar again, down the ride height adjustment collar. It's gonna go helper spring first this time, and then your main spring is gonna sit just on top of the helper spring like that, and it isolates perfectly fine. So you may have an extra piece that looks something like this. You're not going to be using these on the front, so don't worry about those because the helper spring sits on the bottom. You don't need that guy. So top hat goes on. Let's see here. And then we've got our little nut spacer. And the last nut. And you'll get that guy tightened down, and this one will be ready to get installed as well. So for the rear coilovers, we found it easiest to remove this arm as well because it allows you to kind of rotate the spindle in a way that makes it easier to get this lower shock mount on. The axle is pretty close, so if it's not rotated the right way, it can get bound there. So obviously you just want to make sure you're mindful of your ABS line here. Break that guy loose. And then you have a spacer that should have been on there from the factory. You're going to want to add another spacer to the lower shock mount to help it clear the end links, and you'll see that a little bit later when we install the end links. But basically, two of these guys on the lower mount here. It was actually the wrong spacer, just kidding. Sorry guys, we had one in there that was not the right diameter. So 2 spacers on the lower mount there. And then I'm gonna bring this guy up. Again, you might need to kind of move the spindle out of your way as you go. I have to rotate this. So I've got the lower mount on here. Kevin can show you. Let's start the bolt. All right, and then as long as the top hat is clocked the right way, I kind of just pulled the entire thing up like this. So I'm kind of just holding, you can see down low, I'm holding the spindle and just kind of pulling it up towards myself, threading this guy on. Just gonna get everything tightened down here. I guess that was fronts, obviously, subframe is out of the car, so that's probably going to be a little different for you guys, but pretty straightforward. The bolt goes through there, tighten everything down. You're just reusing the OEM stuff. Obviously, you want to make sure it's not binding on anything. Up through the original top hat bolts there, and you'll drop these nuts on, tighten everything down, and put it all back together. So, front's pretty simple, rear's not too hard, but overall, everything looks pretty good. Pretty sure the car's gonna handle awesome. Can't wait to drive this thing, so hopefully that's sometime soon, but in the meantime, we've got quite a bit of other stuff to tackle. We got all of the gaskets and accessories for the most part for the engine. So we're gonna tackle that this weekend, and we'll show you guys pretty much everything you would need to take off of your old engine, switch over to your new turnkey engine, what gaskets you would need to order, etc. And you might even get this thing in the subframe and back in the car pretty soon. So, exciting stuff.